The community center on Greenwood Avenue was not a fancy place. The paint on the walls was peeling in some corners. The ceiling had water stains from last winter's heavy rain. The chairs were old, the kind that squeaked when you sat down. But to the people of this neighborhood, it was home. It was where they held birthday parties for kids who could not afford big celebrations. It was where old friends met every Thursday for card games. It was where the whole community came together once a year for the annual fundraiser. And tonight was that night. Leonard Walker stood near the back entrance of the hall, watching people file in through the front doors. He was 74 years old, with gray hair that had turned almost white in the last few years. His hands were not as steady as they used to be. His fingers ached most mornings, and some days he could barely make a fist. But when he sat at a piano, something changed. The pain faded, the years melted away, and for a little while, he was young again. Leonard had been playing piano for 60 years. He started when he was 14, learning on an old upright piano his mother bought from a church auction. She had saved for 2 years to buy it. He still remembered the day it arrived at their small apartment. His mother had cried, not because she was sad, but because she believed her son had a gift, and she wanted to give him every chance to share it with the world. He never became famous. He never played in concert halls or made records, but he played at weddings and funerals. He played at churches and community centers. He played for people who needed music in their lives, but could not afford to buy tickets to fancy shows. And that was enough for him. That was always enough. Tonight, he was supposed to play for the fundraiser. The money they raised would go toward fixing the roof and buying new books for the small library in the corner of the building. It was not a big event, but it mattered to the people here, and Leonard wanted to give them something special. But there was a problem. He pulled out his phone and checked the screen again. Still no reply. His heart sank a little deeper. You see, Leonard could not play alone anymore. His arthritis had gotten worse over the past 2 years. He could still handle the bass lines, the deep notes on the left side of the keyboard, but his right hand was too slow now, too stiff. He needed someone to play the melody while he handled the lower parts. Together, they could make beautiful music. Alone, he could barely get through a single song. For the past 3 years, a woman named Ruth Ann had been his partner. She was 62. A retired school teacher who had learned piano as a child and picked it up again after her husband passed away. She was not a professional, but she had good timing and a gentle touch. More importantly, she understood Leonard. She knew when to speed up, when to slow down, when to let him lead, and when to take over. They had become more than just musical partners. They had become friends. But 40 minutes ago, Leonard got a phone call that changed everything. Ruth Ann had been in a car accident on her way to the community center. A truck had run a red light and hit the side of her car. She was alive, thank God. The doctors said she would be okay, but she had a broken arm and a concussion, and she was in no condition to play tonight. Leonard had told her not to worry. He said he would figure something out. But as he hung up the phone, he felt his chest tighten. What was he going to do? The show started in less than an hour. There was no time to find another pianist. There was no time to cancel. People were already arriving, carrying plates of food and bottles of soda for the potluck dinner that would follow the performance. He walked slowly toward the stage at the front of the room. The piano sat there, waiting for him. It was a grand piano, old, but well-maintained. The community center had received it as a donation 15 years ago from a wealthy family whose son had passed away. They wanted his piano to go somewhere it would be loved. And it was. Leonard had played it hundreds of times. He knew every key, every pedal, every small imperfection in its sound. He sat down on the bench and placed his hands on the keys. He tried to play a simple scale. His left hand moved smoothly, the notes ringing out clear and strong. But when he tried to use his right hand, his fingers stumbled. They hit wrong notes. They moved too slowly. He tried again, pushing through the pain, but it was no use. He could not do this alone. The room was filling up now. He could hear the chatter of voices, the laughter of children, the scraping of chairs against the floor. He saw familiar faces. Old Mrs. Patterson, who always sat in the front row. The Garcia family, with their 3 young kids who never sat still. Teenagers from the high school down the street, dragged here by their parents, but secretly excited for the free food. And so many others. 200 people, maybe more, all expecting a show. Leonard felt a wave of panic rise in his chest. He had never let these people down before. He had played through sickness, through grief, through storms that knocked out the power and forced him to play by candlelight. But this was different. This was something he could not push through. He thought about making an announcement. He could tell everyone what happened. Explain that the show was canceled. Ask them to understand. But he knew how much this event meant to them. For some of these families, this was the only night out they could afford all year. For some of these kids, this was the only live music they would ever hear. He could not take that away from them. But what choice did he have? He sat there for a long time, staring at the piano keys. The noise of the crowd grew louder behind him. Someone tapped a microphone on the stage, testing the sound system. A child dropped a plate of cookies, and everyone laughed as the mother scrambled to pick them up. Life went on around him, but Leonard felt frozen. And then, without really planning to, he walked to the front of the stage. Someone handed him the microphone. The room began to quiet down, faces turning toward him with expectation. They were ready for the show. They were ready to hear him play. Leonard cleared his throat. His mouth felt dry. He looked out at the crowd, at all those faces he had known for years, and he felt a lump form in his throat. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This fundraiser means so much to our community, and I am honored to be here." He paused. The room was silent now. Everyone was watching him. "But I have to be honest with you," he continued. "Something happened tonight that I did not expect. My partner, Ruth Ann, was in a car accident on her way here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered a prayer. "She is going to be okay," Leonard said quickly. "The doctors say she will make a full recovery, but she cannot be here tonight. And the truth is, I cannot play alone. My hands are not what they used to be." He looked down at his fingers, curled and stiff with age. He had never admitted this to anyone before. He had always pretended he was fine, that the years had not caught up with him. But tonight, standing in front of all these people, he could not pretend anymore. He took a deep breath and looked back at the crowd. "So I have a question for you," he said. "And I know it sounds crazy, but I have to ask." The room was completely silent. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Leonard gripped the microphone tighter and asked the question that would change everything. "Can anyone here play piano?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 200 people sat frozen in their seats, looking at each other, waiting for someone else to answer. Leonard stood on the stage, microphone in hand, feeling more alone than he had felt in years. He knew it was a long shot. Most people in this neighborhood did not play piano. Most people here worked 2 jobs just to pay rent. They did not have time for music lessons or fancy hobbies. They were busy surviving. The silence stretched on. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. It felt like an hour. Leonard was about to apologize and step down from the stage when he noticed something in the back of the room. A small movement. A flash of dark hair. In the very last row, tucked into the corner near the emergency exit, sat an old woman and a young girl. The woman was small and thin, with deep wrinkles around her eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a simple gray sweater that had been washed so many times it had lost its shape. Her hands, folded in her lap, were rough and calloused from years of hard work. The girl beside her could not have been more than 8 years old. She was tiny, even for her age, with straight black hair cut just below her ears. She wore a dress that was clearly too big for her. The sleeves rolled up twice so her hands could poke through. Her shoes were old, the kind you find at thrift stores, with soles worn thin from walking. Her name was May, and she had never taken a piano lesson in her life, but she knew how to play. It started 3 years ago, when May was 5. Her grandmother worked as a cleaner at an office building downtown. The pay was not much, but it was steady work, and steady work was hard to find. The problem was that May's grandmother had to work in the afternoons, right when school ended. There was no money for after-school programs. There was no family nearby to help. So every day, May's grandmother would pick her up from school and take her along to work. But a 5-year-old cannot sit quietly in a hallway for 4 hours. She gets bored. She gets restless. She starts to wander. One afternoon, while her grandmother was mopping floors on the 3rd level, May wandered down to the street. She was not trying to run away. She was just curious. She walked past a bakery that smelled like fresh bread. She walked past a laundromat where machines hummed and spun. And then, she stopped. There was a music shop on the corner. The sign above the door said, "Rosenberg's Piano and Music." The windows were filled with guitars and violins and shiny brass instruments. But right in the center, like a king on a throne, sat a beautiful black piano. May pressed her face against the glass and stared at it. The shop owner noticed her. He was an old man with kind eyes and a beard that had turned white long ago. He could have shooed her away. He could have ignored her, but something about the way she looked at that piano made him open the door. "Would you like to come in?" he asked. May nodded. That was how it began. Every afternoon, while her grandmother cleaned the offices upstairs, May would slip into Rosenberg's Piano and Music. The old shop owner let her sit at the display piano in the back corner. He never charged her a penny. He never asked questions. He just let her play. At first, she did not know what she was doing. She pressed keys at random, listening to the sounds they made. But she was a quick learner. She started watching videos on the shop's old computer. Tutorials that showed where to put her fingers, how to read simple notes, how to play basic songs. She practiced the same songs over and over until her fingers knew them by heart. The shop owner watched her with amazement. He had been selling pianos for 40 years, and he had never seen anyone learn so fast. Most kids needed months to play a simple melody. May figured it out in weeks. By the time she was 6, she was playing songs that took other children years to master. By the time she was 7, she was playing pieces that made customers stop and stare. "You have a gift," the shop owner told her once. "Do you know that? Do you know that?" May did not answer. She did not think of it as a gift. She thought of it as the only thing that made her feel like herself. At school, she was the quiet girl who never raised her hand. At home, she was the girl who did her homework alone while her grandmother worked late. But at the piano, she was someone else. She was powerful. She was free. She was exactly who she was meant to be. Her grandmother knew about the piano, of course. She had heard May play many times, but she never told anyone. She never bragged to the neighbors or pushed May to perform. She was a woman who had learned long ago that the world was not always kind to people like them. She did not want her granddaughter to hope for things that might never come. But tonight, something was different. When Leonard asked his question, May's whole body went stiff. Her hands gripped the edge of her seat so hard, her knuckles turned white. She stared at the old man on the stage, at the piano waiting behind him, and she felt something stir inside her chest. She wanted to play, but she was scared. What if she made a mistake? What if people laughed at her? What if she walked up there, and her fingers froze, and she could not remember a single note? She was just a kid. She was nobody. Who was she to think she could help? Her grandmother noticed the change in her. She had been watching May's face the moment Leonard started speaking. She saw the way her granddaughter's eyes lit up when he mentioned the piano. She saw the way her hands trembled with something that was not quite fear. The old woman leaned close and whispered in May's ear. Her voice was soft, barely louder than a breath. "Go," she said. "Show them who you are." May looked at her grandmother. There were tears in the old woman's eyes. Not sad tears. Proud tears. The kind of tears that come when you see someone you love standing at the edge of something big. "But what if I mess up?" May whispered back. Her grandmother smiled and took her hand. "Then you mess up," she said. "And then you try again. That is how life works. But you will never know what you can do if you stay in this chair." May's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The room was still silent. People were starting to shift in their seats, whispering to each other, assuming nobody would answer the old man's question. But then May stood up. It was a small movement, just a little girl rising from a folding chair in the back row. But somehow, it felt like the whole world shifted. Heads turned, eyes widened. A murmur rippled through the crowd. May took a step forward. Then, another. Her too big dress swished around her knees. Her worn-out shoes squeaked against the floor. She kept her eyes fixed on the piano, afraid that if she looked at all those faces staring at her, she would lose her nerve. The aisle seemed to stretch on forever. Every step felt like a mile. She could hear people whispering, "Is that a child? She cannot be serious. What is she doing?" But May kept walking. Leonard watched her approach. His first thought was that this must be a mistake. Maybe she was walking to the bathroom. Maybe she was looking for her parents. There was no way this tiny girl could be the answer to his question. But she walked straight to the stage. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at him. "I can play," she said. Her voice was small. It was barely above a whisper. But Leonard heard every word. He looked at her for a long moment. He saw her worn-out clothes, and her nervous eyes, and her small hands hanging at her sides. He saw a child who had no business being on this stage. But he also saw something else. Something in the way she stood. Something in the way she looked at the piano behind him. It was a look he recognized. It was the look of someone who needed music the way other people needed air. Leonard stepped aside and gestured toward the piano. "Show me," he said. May climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her legs felt like jelly. Her hands were shaking. She could feel 200 pairs of eyes burning into her back. And she heard the whispers growing louder. "This is ridiculous. Someone should stop her. The poor thing is going to embarrass herself." A woman in the front row leaned toward her husband and shook her head. "This is going to be a disaster," she said, not even bothering to keep her voice down. "Why is he letting a child do this?" May heard every word. Her stomach twisted into knots. For a moment, she thought about turning around and running back to her seat. She thought about hiding behind her grandmother and pretending this never happened. She was just a kid from the back row. She did not belong on this stage. But then, she saw the piano. It was beautiful. Even more beautiful than the one at the music shop. The wood was dark and polished, reflecting the overhead lights like a mirror. The keys were slightly yellowed with age, but they looked well-loved, well-used. This was a piano that had been played thousands of times by hundreds of hands. And now, it was waiting for her. May walked toward it slowly. Leonard stepped back to give her room, his face a mixture of doubt and hope. He wanted to believe this little girl could help him, but he had been playing piano for 60 years. He knew how hard it was. What could an 8-year-old possibly know about any of that? May reached the piano bench and stopped. It was too high for her. Her feet would not reach the pedals. She looked around, unsure what to do. Leonard noticed the problem. He grabbed a small wooden box that someone had used earlier to prop open a window and placed it under the bench. "For your feet," he said gently. May nodded and climbed onto the bench. She adjusted the box until her toes could just barely touch the pedals. It was not perfect, but it would work. The room had gone completely silent. Even the children had stopped moving. Everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. Leonard leaned down so only May could hear him. "Do you know a song called Autumn Leaves?" he asked. It was an old jazz standard, one he had played 1,000 times. If she knew it, they could play together. If she did not, well, at least he had tried. May looked up at him. Her eyes were wide, but there was something steady in them, something calm. "Yes," she said. Leonard blinked. He had not expected that. Autumn Leaves was not a simple song. It had complicated chord changes and a melody that required real skill to play well. Most kids her age were still learning nursery rhymes. "Are you sure?" he asked. May did not answer. Instead, she turned to face the piano. She placed her small hands on the keys. She took a deep breath, and then she closed her eyes. The room held its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. May sat perfectly still, her fingers resting on the keys, her face peaceful and calm. It was as if she had forgotten where she was, as if she had forgotten that 200 people were staring at her, waiting for her to fail. Then she began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, hanging in the air like a bell. Then came another note, and another. The melody of Autumn Leaves began to unfold, slow and gentle, like leaves drifting down from a tree on a cool October evening. The whispers stopped. The doubts vanished. Every single person in that room froze. This was not the clumsy playing of a child who had memorized a few keys. This was something else entirely. The notes flowed from May's fingers, like water from a spring, natural and effortless. She played with a feeling that most musicians spent their entire lives trying to find. She played like the music was not coming from her hands, but from somewhere deep inside her heart. Leonard stood beside the piano, unable to move. His mouth had fallen open. In 60 years of playing, he had heard many talented musicians. He had played with professionals who had trained at the best schools in the country, but he had never heard anything quite like this. The girl's technique was not perfect. Her fingers sometimes landed a little too hard or a little too soft. Her timing was slightly off in places. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling. What mattered was the soul. And this little girl had more soul in her pinky finger than most people had in their entire bodies. May opened her eyes and glanced at Leonard. It was a quick look, barely half a second. But he understood what it meant. She was inviting him to join her. His hands were trembling as he sat down on the bench beside her. He placed his fingers on the lower keys, the bass notes that his left hand could still manage. He waited for the right moment in the melody, and then he began to play. Their sounds blended together like they had been playing together for years. Leonard's deep bass notes rumbled beneath May's delicate melody, supporting her, lifting her up, and somehow, without speaking a single word, they understood each other perfectly. When May slowed down, Leonard slowed down. When she sped up, he followed. It was like a conversation without words, a dance without steps. The song built and built, growing more powerful with every measure. May's small hands flew across the keys, hitting notes that should have been impossible for someone her age. Leonard's left hand moved with a strength he had not felt in years. The arthritis forgotten, the pain gone. Together, they created something beautiful, something magical, something that neither of them could have made alone. In the audience, people started to cry. Old Mrs. Patterson, who always sat in the front row, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. A teenage boy, who had been dragged here by his parents, sat forward in his seat, his mouth hanging open. A young mother held her baby close and let the tears stream down her face. And in the back row, May's grandmother wept silently, her rough hands covering her mouth, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was what she had always known. This was what she had seen Every time she watched May play at the music shop, her granddaughter was special. Her granddaughter had a gift. And now, finally, the world was seeing it too. The song reached its final section. The melody slowed, became soft and tender. May played the last few notes with her eyes closed again, feeling each one as if it were a goodbye. Leonard held the final bass note, letting it ring out into the silence. And then it was over. For a moment, nobody moved. The last note faded into nothing, and the room was completely still. It was as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Then someone in the back started to clap. It was a single pair of hands at first, slow and hesitant. But then, another person joined in. And another. And another. The clapping grew louder, faster, until it became a roar. People rose to their feet, one by one, until the entire room was standing. 200 people gave May a standing ovation. She sat on the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, looking out at the crowd with wide, disbelieving eyes. She had never performed for anyone before. She had never imagined that so many people would want to hear her play. She did not know what to do, so she just sat there, frozen, overwhelmed. Leonard looked at the little girl beside him. There were tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. He reached over and placed his old, weathered hand on top of her small one. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for answering my question." May looked up at him. For the first time that night, she smiled, but the night was far from over. Because in the crowd, making her way toward the stage, was a woman who would change May's life forever. The applause continued for what felt like forever. People were cheering, whistling, stomping their feet on the old wooden floor. Some were still crying. Others were laughing with pure joy. The community center had never seen anything like this before. May sat frozen on the piano bench, overwhelmed by all the noise and attention. She did not know what to do with her hands. She did not know where to look. A few minutes ago, she was invisible. Now everyone in the room was staring at her like she had just performed a miracle. Leonard stood up from the bench and started clapping too. He turned to the crowd and gestured toward May, encouraging them to keep going. The applause grew even louder. Someone in the middle of the room shouted, "Play another one!" And others quickly joined in, chanting for more. But before May could respond, a woman pushed her way through the crowd toward the stage. She was tall and elegant, maybe in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a dark blue coat that looked expensive, the kind of coat you see in store windows but never actually buy. Her shoes clicked sharply against the floor as she walked, and there was something about the way she moved that made people step aside without being asked. She did not look like she belonged here. The community center on Greenwood Avenue was not the kind of place where women in expensive coats usually spent their Friday evenings. But here she was, walking straight toward the stage, with a look on her face that was hard to read. Leonard noticed her approaching and felt a flicker of concern. He stepped forward, putting himself between the woman and May, ready to protect the little girl if needed. But the woman stopped at the edge of the stage and looked up at him with eyes that were bright with emotion. She was not angry. She was amazed. "Who is this child?" she asked. Her voice was clear and direct, the voice of someone used to being in charge. "Who has been teaching her?" Leonard glanced back at May, then at the woman. "Nobody," he said slowly. "She taught herself." The woman's eyes widened. For a moment, she did not seem to believe him. "That is not possible," she said. "I have been working with young musicians for over 30 years. I have seen prodigies. I have trained students who went on to play in concert halls around the world. But I have never seen a child play like that without any formal training." Leonard shrugged. "I do not know what to tell you. I just met her 10 minutes ago." The woman turned her attention to May, who was still sitting on the piano bench, watching the conversation with wide, nervous eyes. The woman's expression softened. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage and walked slowly toward the little girl. "What is your name?" she asked gently. May's voice came out as a whisper. "May. May," the woman repeated. "That is a beautiful name. My name is Mrs. Chen. I am the director of the Westbrook Conservatory." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even people who did not know much about music had heard of the Westbrook Conservatory. It was one of the most famous music schools in the entire state, maybe even the entire country. Students came from all over the world to study there. Getting accepted was almost impossible. Getting a scholarship was like winning the lottery. And the director herself was standing right here, in this tiny community center, looking at an 8-year-old girl in a second-hand dress. "How long have you been playing?" Mrs. Chen asked. May thought about it. 3 years, she said. "And you taught yourself? No teachers? No lessons?" May shook her head. "There is a music shop near where my grandmother works. The owner lets me practice there. I watch videos on the computer and try to copy what they do." Mrs. Chen stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned around and scanned the crowd. "Where is her family?" she called out. "I need to speak with her family." In the back row, May's grandmother slowly rose to her feet. Her legs were shaking. She did not understand what was happening. All she knew was that a powerful woman was asking for her, and powerful people usually meant trouble. She made her way through the crowd, apologizing as she squeezed past people until she reached the stage. She looked up at Mrs. Chen with a mixture of fear and confusion. "I am her grandmother," she said in accented English. "Is there a problem?" Mrs. Chen climbed down from the stage and took the old woman's hands in her own. It was a gesture so unexpected, so gentle, that May's grandmother did not know how to react. "There is no problem," Mrs. Chen said. "There is the opposite of a problem. Your granddaughter is extraordinary. I have spent my entire career searching for talent like hers, and I can count on one hand the number of times I have found it." May's grandmother blinked. She did not fully understand what the woman was saying. "She is a good girl," she said carefully. "She practices very hard." "I can see that," Mrs. Chen said. "But this is more than hard work. This is a gift. And gifts like this need to be nurtured. The right opportunities." She paused and looked directly into the old woman's eyes. "I want to offer your granddaughter a full scholarship to the Westbrook Conservatory." The words hung in the air. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then May's grandmother let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her wrinkled cheeks. She tried to say something, but the words would not come. On the stage, May did not understand what was happening. She saw her grandmother crying and felt a stab of panic. Was something wrong? Had she done something bad? She jumped down from the stage and ran to her grandmother, wrapping her small arms around the old woman's waist. "What is wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you crying?" Her grandmother knelt down and took May's face in her hands. Her eyes were red and wet, but she was smiling. Smiling bigger than May had ever seen her smile before. "Nothing is wrong," she said in their native language. "Everything is right. Everything is finally right." She pulled May into a tight hug, holding her like she would never let go. Around them, people started to realize what was happening. The news spread through the crowd in whispers and gasps. The conservatory offered her a scholarship, a full scholarship. Can you believe it? The applause started again, even louder than before. People were cheering for May, for her grandmother, for the impossible thing that had just happened in their little community center. Leonard stood on the stage, watching it all with tears streaming down his face. He thought about his mother, who had saved for 2 years to buy him his first piano. He thought about all the years he had spent playing in places just like this, for people who could not afford fancy concert tickets. He had always believed that music was for everyone, that talent could come from anywhere. And tonight, a little girl in worn-out shoes had proved him right. Mrs. Chen approached him while the celebration continued below. "You gave her a chance," she said quietly. Not many people would have done that. Leonard shook his head. I just asked a question. Mrs. Chen smiled. Sometimes asking the right question is all it takes. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small card. She handed it to Leonard. The conservatory hosts a benefit concert every spring. We bring in our best students to perform for donors and supporters. I would be honored if you would come. I have a feeling you will want to see how this story ends. Leonard took the card and looked at it. It was simple and elegant, with the conservatory's name printed in gold letters. He looked back at May, who was still wrapped in her grandmother's arms, surrounded by neighbors and friends who were patting her on the back and telling her how proud they were. I would not miss it for the world, he said. 8 years passed, but May never forgot the night that changed her life. She remembered every detail. The peeling paint on the walls, the squeaky chairs, the look on Leonard's face when she told him she could play. She remembered her grandmother's whisper in her ear, telling her to show them who she was. She remembered the way her heart pounded as she walked down that long aisle toward the stage. Most of all, she remembered the question. That simple, desperate question that opened a door she never knew existed. Can anyone here play piano? May was 16 now. She had grown taller, though she was still small for her age. Her hair was longer, falling past her shoulders. Her hands, once so tiny they could barely reach an octave, now moved across the keys with grace and power. She was no longer the invisible girl in the back row. She was a star. The Westbrook Conservatory had been everything Mrs. Chen promised and more. May had the best teachers, the best instruments, the best opportunities. She learned things she never could have learned on her own. She studied music theory and composition. She practiced for hours every day, pushing herself harder than anyone asked her to. She performed in recitals and competitions, winning awards that filled an entire shelf in her grandmother's small apartment. But fame and success did not change who she was. Every Sunday afternoon, no matter how busy her schedule, May returned to the community center on Greenwood Avenue. She would sit at the old grand piano, the same one she had played that first night, and she would make music for anyone who wanted to listen. There was no ticket price, no fancy program, just a girl and a piano and a room full of neighbors who had known her when she was nobody. And sitting beside her, every single Sunday, was Leonard. His hair had turned completely white now. His hands shook more than they used to, and some days the arthritis was so bad he could barely hold a cup of coffee. But when he sat at that piano with May, something magical happened. The years fell away. The pain disappeared. And for a little while, he was young again. They never talked much during these sessions. They did not need to. The music said everything that needed to be said. Leonard would play the bass notes, slow and steady, while May's fingers danced across the higher keys. They understood each other in a way that went beyond words. They were partners. They were friends. They were family. But time, as it always does, had other plans. It was a Tuesday morning in March when May got the call. She was in the middle of a practice session at the conservatory, working on a difficult piece she was preparing for an upcoming competition. Her phone buzzed in her bag, and normally, she would have ignored it. But something made her stop. Something made her reach for it. It was Leonard's daughter. Her voice was calm but heavy with sadness. Leonard had passed away in his sleep the night before. He was 82 years old. He went peacefully, with a smile on his face and a photo of May's first recital on his nightstand. May did not cry at first. She just sat there, staring at the piano keys, feeling like someone had reached into her chest and pulled out something vital. Leonard was gone. The man who had given her a chance when no one else would. The man who had believed in her before he even heard her play. The man who had become like a grandfather to her. He was gone. The funeral was held on a Saturday afternoon at a small church near the community center. The pews were packed with people whose lives Leonard had touched over the years. Old friends from the neighborhood, former students he had taught decades ago, members of the community center who remembered him playing at fundraisers and holiday parties. May sat in the front row with her grandmother, who held her hand tightly and did not let go. The service was simple and beautiful. People stood up and shared stories about Leonard. They talked about his kindness, his humor, his love for music. They talked about the way he made everyone feel welcome, no matter who they were or where they came from. And then, it was May's turn. She walked to the front of the church, her legs unsteady, her heart aching. There was a piano near the altar, an old upright that Leonard had donated to the church years ago. May sat down on the bench and looked out at the crowd. "Leonard asked me a question once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He asked if anyone could play piano. I was 8 years old. I was scared. I did not think anyone would want to hear me. But he gave me a chance. He let me sit beside him. He let me be part of something bigger than myself." 8. She paused, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill over. "He changed my life that night. And every Sunday after, he reminded me why I play. Not for awards, not for fame, not for money. I play because music brings people together. I play because it heals. I play because it is the most honest way I know to say the things that words cannot express." She turned to face the piano and placed her hands on the keys. "This is for you, Leonard. Thank you for asking." And then she played. It was Autumn Leaves, the same song they had played together that first night, the same song they had played together every Sunday for 8 years. But this time, she played it alone. The melody filled the church, soft and gentle at first, then building with emotion. May poured everything she had into those notes. Her grief, her gratitude, her love. She played for Leonard. She played for her grandmother. She played for every person who had ever been told they were not good enough, not talented enough, not worthy enough to try. By the time she finished, there was not a dry eye in the church. May sat at the piano for a long moment after the last note faded. She could almost feel Leonard beside her, his old hands resting on the bass keys, his gentle voice saying, "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all. She smiled through her tears. 6 years later, May released her first album. She was 22 years old, a graduate of the Westbrook Conservatory, a rising star in the classical music world. Critics praised her technical skill. But what they talked about most was her feeling, the way she played with her whole heart, the way she made every note mean something. The album was called The Question. On the first page of the album notes, there was a dedication. It was short, just 2 lines. But everyone who read it understood what it meant. For Leonard, thank you for asking. And on the last track of the album, there was a recording of Autumn Leaves. But it was not a solo. It was a duet. May had taken an old recording from one of their Sunday sessions at the community center, a recording her grandmother had made on her phone years ago. She had cleaned up the audio, layered her new performance over Leonard's old one, and created something that sounded like magic. If you listened closely, you could hear it. 2 pianists, separated by time, but connected by something deeper. An old man and a young girl, playing together one last time. The album went on to win 3 major awards. May performed at concert halls around the world. She was interviewed on television and featured in magazines. But when reporters asked her about the secret to her success, she always gave the same answer. "I am not special," she would say. "I was just a scared little girl who got lucky. Someone asked a question, and I was brave enough to answer." That is all any of us can do. Be brave enough to answer when life asks us a question. And whenever she said this, she would think of Leonard. She would think of that old community center with the peeling paint and the squeaky chairs. She would think of her grandmother's whisper in her ear, "Go. Show them who you are." May smiled. She had shown them, and she would keep showing them for the rest of her life. Because that is what Leonard would have wanted. That is what the music demanded. and that is what she was born to do.